Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Anyone? Oh, there's Terry. Terry, hello. Who else is coming? Okay, we're waiting for a few people to join us. I can sort of kind of see a little bit. Can you hear? Is this pin? Oh, okay. Can you hear me, Terry? Super. Okay. So a few people have started to show up. Let's see who else is here. I see Laura. Super. Um, let's see, just a few. See if Tangi needs help. I think she may need some help on how to watch this. I don't see her coming on yet, and she's just so excited. You may want to see if you can help her come on. Boy, the screen is huge this time. There's Christine. She made it. Yay! Hey there. So let's see who else is coming. Come on, guys. I'm freezing this morning, by the way. We have it cold today. Terry, Christine, do you want to take a look at some of the people like Tangi was looking to see how to get on? Okay, cool. So they will have to, do I show up in the group as like as a post? Is that what it looks like? Oh, there's Susan. Hello. Barb. Okay, there you go. iCat is still sleeping somewhere. I don't know where she's at. That she normally walks by and will knock on the door to get out. So you will see her. Let's see. I'm concerned about Tenji not making it, not figuring out how to get on. Okay, so let me start. While we're still waiting, I just wanted to explain before I start talking about the questions that I received. I want to explain why I am asking everyone to give me the questions in advance. And let's see what Christine is rating. I like the video quality. Oh yeah, I finally got a new webcam. It's not going to break down like it did in the middle of the biohackers. Anyway, so the reason why I'm asking you to send the questions earlier is because, as you can see, I can't actually see the questions. I have a big monitor, and when I am doing this webcam, nearly the whole thing is my own face. I'm looking at myself. I don't actually see you. I see on the right side of the monitor in a very thin line some of the names of the people who are coming up. So I can't actually, while I'm talking, I can't read any of the comments or questions. So I would like you to always send the questions in advance. And also because my eyes are pretty bad. And so I look up on a document, on a piece of paper, which looks like this with a huge type, so I can perhaps read it without glasses, so I don't have to constantly look up what did you write and what did you ask and what do I need to say. So it's best for me if you ask it in advance and not write on time, okay? And I try to make it 1 hour, and it's going to be recorded and will be available for you in the group all the time. So let me go. I'm taking it by whatever order I happen to bump into the questions. So the first question was asked by Elaine Schills, and she asked a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to address every single one of them. So the first one is that tracking and balancing for keto versus zero carb and versus carnivore diet. And she said that she heard that balancing sodium and potassium being less important sometimes with these diets than in the original protocol. If you primarily eat meat, does the ratio still matter as much? So let me right away correct that. The ratio always matters. It doesn't matter what you eat. The ratio is always, the potassium and sodium ratio is not changing. What changes perhaps is how much sodium extra you need to take if you eat carbs. But if you're in a zero carb or a carnivore diet, by definition, you're not eating vegetables or fruits or nuts or things that are high in carbohydrate. And so the only thing that you need to watch out for in terms of adding extra sodium is if you eat the kind of organ meat or some seafood has glucose in it, which is glycogen, which is fine. You can eat that because that's part of the meat, or dairy. And so you have some carbs per se. I don't call that carbs. I call carbs the vegetables and fruits and other kind of stuff. But there's some natural glucose in everything that you eat. So when you're eating these foods, you have minimal concern about salting after eating carbs. That's basically what is different. But the sodium and potassium ratio is permanent. That remains the same. What you may find is that by not eating carbohydrates, you're going to end up eating less salt because you don't have to control for the salt, for the glucose kicking sodium out of and water out of your diet. So you will not make up for it. Her next question was, also, we are supposed to eat fresh foods for the most part, so having a snack of pork rinds and bacon in its own would obviously be sodium heavy. If we were to do that on occasion, then would we just skip our salt with a glass of water? So let me already say, you have to separate pork rinds with bacon. They're not the same thing. Bacon is from the belly of the pork, and by the time you cook it, it's mostly just salt, because you cook most of the fat out of it, depending upon how crispy you like it. It has very little protein, I think 1 gram of protein or something per slice, depending upon the kind of bacon. So it's a different kind of a pork part, and it has next to nothing other than salt. But when you're eating pork rinds, that's a different story. It contains the skin. Any part of your skin is actually protein. So if you're eating pork rinds, now granted there are at least 10 different types of pork rinds, but where I get my pork rinds are not the prepackaged kinds, but I happen to live very close to Mexico, and so we have a lot of Mexican stores and Mexican restaurants and Mexican places where I can shop. So we have a Mexican store very close to me where they make their pork rinds right there in front of me. And actually buy the fat, the pork lard from there, because they save the pork lard and they sell it separately. So that kind of a pork rind is full of protein. It's a very high protein food, and it may or may not have too much salt. It depends upon how they prepare it. There could be dried pork rind, which is air dried, and it's very, very thin, very lightweight. You can throw it up like a balloon and it'll crumble, and that is very salty. That is made by air drying with a salted pork rind. The kind I eat is actually fried in its own fat, and it doesn't need that much salt. So the pork rind I eat is not really that salty. Then there's also chicharron. There are several kinds of chicharron, which is a pork belly part that may actually have the skin on it, like the ones that I buy do. And that too, it may or may not be salty. The meat becomes really difficult to chew, and you may not have access to that. So there are whole different types of pork rinds. So you need to look up the label, what the nutrition value is, to decide whether it is high salt item or not. The pork rinds I eat are not really high salt item, but are extremely high in protein. So if you eat bacon, I suppose, yes, you can count that as a salt pill if that is how you prefer to eat it. Take a look at how many slices of bacon it takes to make up for an eighth of a teaspoon of salt, which is 300 milligrams. If you're eating pork rinds, that may not be enough, and you may have to salt after that. So check again, depending on the kind of pork rinds that you're eating. Another question from her, still at Elaine Shields, is how might my ratio of sodium to potassium and frequency of salted water change if I'm eating on zero carb or carnivore diet as opposed to keto? Okay, so this is a good question. So in keto, because we are burning fat and not glucose, we have a different amount of water loss and salt loss as a result, because we burn our own stored fat if you're doing it right. And if you're burning our own stored fat, if you're looking at a fat molecule, and I think I talked about this in a group once at least, if you're looking at the molecule of fat, it is made up of a lot of carbohydrate, hydrogen, and oxygen. So if you know a little bit of chemistry, water is H2O, like hydrogen, two hydrogen molecules and one oxygen. So when you're burning fat, this H2O will have to come out. So when you burn fat, you're actually also getting rid of water in your body. That's one of the reasons also why you're losing weight really fast, because you're not just losing fat, you're also losing water. But when you're losing water, you're also losing salt. So in a ketogenic diet, you need actually more salt and water than you do on a standard protocol or on the carnivore diet or on the zero carb diet in general. This is a little bit different per person. So, excuse me, you have to kind of experiment of how much salt you need to eat, but it will definitely be more, excuse me, definitely be more than on any of the other diet forms. So when you come into keto and I do the analysis of the questions, I tell you to increase your water and to increase your salt. The next question from her is she would like to have more information on period prepping, meaning menstrual period, and what to do if you notice migraine patterns with ovulation. So some people, most people only get migraines before the period, that is the PMS equivalent. But she apparently also gets a migraine when she ovulates, which is unusual, because ovulation is associated with the estrogen, and estrogen uses less of the insulin than progesterone does, which is a steroid, a more stronger steroid hormone. And so it is expected that a PMS would be equal to a larger migraine than, for example, when you're ovulating. So if you find that you get migraine for both times, it's 2 times out of a month, given that our preparation is 5 days, starts 5 days prior to the PMS, and this would be 5 days also prior to the ovulation. So that would be representing a third of the months when you'd have to be on either the zero carb or the carnivore diet. So might as well switch to the zero carb or the carnivore diet to prevent all that. And you still would have to monitor and increase salt, and it will probably not work right away. So you will have to work on that to ensure that you reduce even your protein, perhaps if necessary, so that you get less glucose conversion, although it shouldn't be a problem with protein, but if it is, then you might want to do that. Let's see. God, what happened to my voice? Is going away. Okay, so she has one more question, and she says, I only ever get migraines that begin 4 or 5 a.m. I usually jolt awake at that time and physically very hot and overheated. I miss the prodrome phase entirely and don't even prevent it because I don't know it's happening. I've tried my blood glucose and I tested my blood glucose and blood ketones at that time, and it's normal, so no sugar crash. She tried doubling or tripling her salt before bed at night, and that just caused her to wake up with more migraine frequently. So what should she do? So one of the things that is important to note here is that heating up in the middle of the night, if it is not age-related, which can happen with, unfortunately, with older ladies, it can also be food-related. Either you go to sleep too soon after you ate, or the kind of foods that you eat wake you up in the middle of the night. And that actually happens to me too. If I have an extremely big, I'm a near carnivore, not always, not religiously, but I'm trying to be always carnivore. And so what I find is sometimes when I cook something that is amazingly good, like I cooked beef shank together with beef ribs the other day, and the two combined just had amazing juices, and I ate enough for 3 people probably. So yes, that night I spent also, I kept on waking up for being very hot, throwing the blanket off, throwing it back on, and I was cool, and then waking up again and throwing it off and throwing it on. It just simply means that your body is still metabolizing, digesting, and synthesizing protein. You know, there's a speed, the maximum speed we can synthesize protein with is, I believe, 0.6 gram per minute. So it's pretty slow. And if you eat a lot of protein, it may take a long time to synthesize it all. And as you synthesize it, it's going to give you some heat energy. Protein is not used for the kind of energy that you could be running around with like a marathon or something like that, but it will produce heat. And there is going to be glucose also released from protein. So about 50% give and take, depending on the kind of protein and depending on what nutrition format you are in, whether it's keto or protocol or carnivore or zero carb, it's going to differ a little bit. But if you look at the amino acid profile for proteins, 50% of the amino acids can only convert to glucose. And of the remaining 50%, I think about 8 out of 10 of these remaining ones can convert to either glucose or ketones, depending upon what kind of nutritional profile you have, and only 2 can convert to ketones alone. So if you're on the carbohydrate or glucose burning mode, most of this is going to convert to glucose, and that's going to generate energy. It's going to generate heat. So you have to be careful how much of that you eat before you sleep. So that could be part of your cause of why you keep on waking up, and why you may get the migraine in the morning. I don't even think that it says that you get migraine, but if you do get migraine, it could very well be that you're still in the glucose burning mode, and that too much protein just hits at once, and your insulin releases them at once as the insulin is able to, and it's just too much glucose and you're not controlling for it with salt, perhaps. So now moving on to Philip Bradley. So he wanted me to talk about vestibular migraine, which he considers to be a different class of migraines. So let me first say that it's not really a different class of migraines. Migraine is migraine. So all migraines are pretty much the same migraine. What differs is what part of the brain, the migraine zone, which is the zone that is not able to generate an action potential, appears. So in a vestibular migraine, it's more around the ear, meaning that it affects your hearing, it affects your balance, it affects your sight. And at the end, it can make you nauseous, because when you get dizzy or you have sea leg, which is also called a mal de Barkman, or vertigo perhaps, obviously it's going to upset your stomach. So these are sort of kind of connected. But if you're looking at migraineurs in general and migraines, the vestibular symptoms are present in just about every single migraine. So it is a symptom. I would say it's almost like a prodrome for other people. Now, those who only have this may not get pain with the migraine. So it's actually a good state to be, but just note that it may convert later on into a painful type migraine. So it may just be, just as, for example, cyclical vomiting syndrome is a particular phase of migraine that will eventually develop into migraine. Or, for example, IBS is a form of migraine. It's a prodrome for us who are migraineurs, but before we had migraines, like we were not born with migraine. It sort of kind of evolved over the years as we got older. And we had a lot of prodromes as we went through life, and not each represented certain stage of the development of brain toward more connections and the use of more electrolyte, more need of the communication, more neurotransmitters, and so forth. So I would consider vestibular migraine to be potentially a temporary situation that may or may not morph into other kind of migraines where you actually, it's not other kind, but a further stage of migraine where you're going to experience pain as well. So don't exclude that. It's not really a different migraine. It's just a different phase of the same migraine. Now, Cheryl Koch, I don't know if I pronounce that Koch or Coach properly. She was asking, what I want to know is how to calm down temporary neurotransmitters that ramp up every night, overnight, awake after 4 hours of sleep and feel wired. Mouth or medium pain and inflammation in my head, behind my eye, and even one side of my nose is closed. It happens every night with headache, feel like a storm in my head around 4 a.m., and I can't relax to get back to sleep feeling connected. Well, a couple of things. So having what's called a busy brain, it's a very normal event. So for example, I have, as some of you know, this Fitbit machine. And so when I'm working with Fitbit, it gives me recorded information about my sleep patterns. So I can see how much deep sleep I get, how much light sleep I get, the REM, which is the dreaming part, and how much I'm awake. And I can see that this depends a lot on how much I ate, when I ate, what I ate, how much workout I had, and in general, what stress has affected me. Now, when I started my migraines when I was in my teens, but when I first started the actual pain period, which was in my 20s, late 20s, I went through biofeedback because I felt the same thing. I had my brain was all over the place. I couldn't calm down. My thoughts were just flying left and right. Anxiety issues, quite common and very normal for a migrainer to go through these. So I went through biofeedback. You can also do meditation. I did meditation as well as I did self-hypnosis. So the combination of these three things greatly helped me control tuning out. So the important thing about this whole thing is that to shut down your brain is extremely difficult, particularly when you sleep. And that is a question that I'm going to address in a minute that Lucretia asked about insulin resistance, that will explain a little bit more about why our brains are so busy at night and why we tend to be so excitable. So until I get to that answer, the answer for you is to try to practice meditation, listen to some meditation, listen to or read or whatever, something that is calming, relaxing, and changes the direction of your mind. So you're stop thinking about whatever you're thinking and change to a calmer environment. Like I love to listen to some books that are funny or relaxing. Sometimes I may listen to classical music. Sometimes I just play a couple of games of solitaire, whatever allows you to sort of tune out and change the world around you. Then Laura Liponai, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Liponis, perhaps? She was asking, it would be great if you could talk through a day of tracking macros, water, potassium, sodium, and what that looks like, starting with breakfast and your last meal of the day. I think it might be helpful for the group. If I recall, I think you are either zero carb or carnivore diet, so maybe a day of a standard version of Stand to Migraine Protocol would be more relative for those of us in this group, though. Yes, I am on the carnivore and zero carbs, so let me explain when I was still on the protocol diet, and I was on that for a long time. Typical day at that time looked like this. I would get up and immediately take salt. At that time, I was still taking pinches of salt, and it was really not my kind of thing to do. So I'm taking a salt pill, which is the Health by Principle. It's a little bit bigger than the eighth of a teaspoon. It's 360 milligrams sodium. So I start actually, I used to start with one salt pill and 1 glass of water. That was before I did anything else. And then after that, I would have my morning. I always, all my life, always had a glass of milk, usually with cacao powder without sugar. And now also add cacao butter without sugar. That's really cool to mix the two together. And a dash of salt into my milk as well, and heat it up and stir it up with a frothing thingy, which makes it really tasty. I've never been much of a breakfast eater, but there was a time when I would make, say, you're going to find this under recipes. It's called the Zabaglione. The Zabaglione alla Angela. I think Christine gave that name. And that would be when I would mix heavy whipping cream up to whip it up with a little bit of salt. And I would add 2 eggs to that and continue to whip. So it becomes like a really fluffy and very good looking mix. And then I would bake that in the oven. And while I was still on the protocol and still ate some fruits, I would decorate it with raspberries. I would put that in there, but it was still soft before I baked it. I would put raspberries in there, maybe cheese on the top. The cheese would come on later. some sliced meat like provolone, sorry, not provolone, prosciutto and stuff like that. You could put on top of it. It's almost like you can design it as if it were a pizza, but not necessarily anything other than an egg with cream and a little bit of butter in it so it doesn't stick and then not stick. And I would do that in the oven. That used to be my breakfast. I don't eat breakfast anymore, but that used to be my breakfast. And then I would have a little bit of coffee, just a little bit. It's espresso and with a lot of cream, which I really enjoyed. And again, no sugar, but there's salt in the coffee to remove the bitterness. For lunch, I would have, at that time, I still eat salads and that kind of things. I would have a salad, maybe have a can of sardines or some kind of maybe hot dog that is not your typical hot dog, but we have a German store, and German stores usually have a more purer, if you can say, form of some of these cold cuts and hot dogs. So I would be able to eat a hot dog in its natural casing, not the plastic ones. And then for dinner, the usual steak, whatever, I still eat carbs. So I would have cauliflower. I may have, I don't even know what kind of vegetables I used to have, zucchini, spinach. Maybe I would make a spinach with milk and cook it with garlic, that kind of stuff, and any kind of meat at that time. So that would be a typical protocol meal. But it was important to reduce the frequency of eating to 3 times maximum a day. So now many of you in the group are not on protocol anymore because of insulin resistance. So you're on the zero carb or carnivore. And the difference is the carnivore is the same as the zero carb. The difference is whether you can eat dairy or not. Some of you could eat dairy, meaning your insulin resistance would allow it, but your lactose intolerance, and so you can't. Some of you can have some form of dairy like cheese or cottage cheese, but not milk and or cream. And some of you can't have any because your insulin resistance is so bad that you can't, you should not, because you get spiked really badly by milk, and also because you may be completely intolerant. I happen to be one who is tolerant to all form of dairy, and for me, that's a comfort food. So for those of you on the carnivore or the zero carb diet, I can tell you what I eat now, which would be just, I don't eat until about 2 o'clock. So I haven't eaten anything to eat yet today. And on Sundays, I don't eat at all. I just sometimes forget, and I go to the gym without it, and actually it works out really, really very good. Or sometimes I don't forget and I do eat, but maybe I have 16, 18, 20 hours without eating. I try to really extend it and reduce the amount of time that I'm allowed to eat. But within the window that I am allowed to eat, I can eat as much as I want. So at that time, so if you find me eating breakfast, say at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're going to see me eating a 1,200 calorie huge meal breakfast. And that's going to be the same as I described earlier. It's going to be perhaps this time 2 eggs or 3. And that's going to be 4-minute soft-boiled eggs, which I really like, where the egg yolks is still liquid. It's not cold, it's not raw, but it's still liquid, and I really like it. I don't like egg whites too much, so they kind of push aside. That with salt. I will have string cheese, which is, I'm totally addicted to string cheese right now, and I'm taking my time, pulling the strings off one by one, driving my husband nuts, but it takes me an hour to eat the string cheese. It's very good, and that's about 8 grams of protein too. Then I have my milk, and I still mix it with the 2 kinds of cacao, the powder and the butter, and also salt. But now I'm doing an extra trick. I no longer have coffee that is caffeinated. I now have decaffeinated coffee, but I have a better coffee machine now, which can create milk frothing the milk. So in addition to having my 1 glass of milk, I add some frosted milk to the top of it, which is really, really cool tasting. It just makes it richer. It's a thicker milk. And when I make my decaf, I also brew the decaf with the same espresso machine. And now I add this thick frozen milk into it, in addition to the coffee, the cacao powder and butter and salt. And I now have one of these whipping machines that you squeeze in a little nitric oxide little thing, and then it just blows up the whipped cream into, the whipping cream into whipped cream. And so I fill the cup. So I probably have about 3-4 ounces of whipping cream, which is extremely high fat and very high calorie. I have about 2 ounces of milk, and the remaining 2 ounces perhaps of decaf and all the cocoa butter and cocoa powder, everything. So that's a very, very rich meal. If you add up the total calories, you come out to be over 1,000 calories. So that usually keeps me going all the way until dinner, and often not even hungry at dinner. I go to gym usually at 4 or 4:30, depending upon whether it's weightlift or kickbox, and then I eat dinner. Usually dinner at 7, and the dinner is usually, lately it's most of the time beef, some kind of beef. It could be steak, it could be ribs, it could be my latest love, which is the shank. And it comes with the bone marrow in the middle, and you spread the bone marrow on it. It's really fantastic. Liver, we eat a lot of fish. That could be salmon or cod. There was something else that I had the other day. It was also white fish. We also have shrimp a lot. And I eat a lot of canned sardines. My latest love is a cod liver that is canned. It's really very, very fatty. It's very rich. It's if you like foie gras, it is similar but even lighter. It's very tasty. And oysters. So there's a whole variety of foods that I eat, but pretty much sticking with the carnivore at the time. The only break, sometimes I may have one little baby pepper, just like a little bell pepper, but very little one. Sometimes I really enjoy having one, and I sometimes have some sunflower seeds. So that would be a typical day for me now in terms of what I eat. So I have one more question before I get to Lucretia's question, but this question just came recently from Jen, and she wanted to find out about the keto diet, and how come that you guys have to wait to get into the keto diet when you have insulin resistance, and what can one eat out when going to a restaurant and is eating carnivore or zero carb. So first of all, let me say that you don't have to wait to get to the keto group when you have insulin resistance, but you have to understand that when you're in the keto group, and if you know that you have insulin resistance, you won't be able to start keto necessarily right away. You will still be put on the zero carb or the carnivore diet. It's a different ratio, but you still will be doing that for a couple of reasons. One is that when I'm looking at other people who are not migraineurs, and they want to get into ketosis, they just get into ketosis. There's absolutely no difficulty, no complications. They don't get, even if they have diabetes, they don't get reactive hypoglycemic actions. They don't get sugar crashes. They just get into it. I mean, I didn't know that both my older son and my husband are in ketosis. They didn't even know they got into it. They're not even, my older son came over once when I checked whether he was in ketosis or not, and he wasn't. He had a couple of bites of donuts like a few hours earlier. So when it comes to migraineurs, we have a completely different way of getting into ketosis, and we have trouble. For us, it is very difficult. Our insulin and glucagon, which you by now have heard, which is the anti-insulin, don't work the same way. I haven't quite figured out yet what it is. I'm talking to several doctors about that who are more knowledgeable, because many of us, for example, can have perfectly healthy fasting insulin, which would be between 2 and 6, still have huge reaction to eating carbohydrates and a huge reaction to getting into ketosis, and it's not simple. So our physiology is different. So when you get into ketogenic group, or when you want to get into the ketogenic group, you can get in there, but you may not yet be able to change your diet, particularly if you're getting the kind of insulin resistance showing up on your blood test that shows reactive hypoglycemia. If you don't have reactive hypoglycemia at all, meaning your blood sugar is just high all the time, like I did somebody's test yesterday, a new member, I think Marsha, I'm not quite sure if it was her name. She had just hyperglycemia all the way through. She can even get into fasting right away, because she won't have any negative consequence with a sugar crash. But those of you whose blood sugar is sort of kind of reactive hypoglycemia, you go down and up, and particularly those of you who go quite low, you can't get onto the ketogenic diet right away. We had somebody who did that, and we didn't know any better at that time. She's in a keto group. She's from another country, and her blood sugar went down into the 50s. I mean, that was a touch and go for quite some time. And finally, I realized what was going on because there they can't even test, and she was this thin, and I was concerned that she was going to have LADA, which is the latent onset of type 1 diabetes. So she had it checked. No, she had completely normal insulin. I think it was 6. So it's not even low. Then I just put her on the zero carb or carnivore diet. I forget now which one. And so she's been improving ever since. And now finally her blood glucose is stabilized and it's normal. And she started to gain a little weight, which is great. So we work differently. For regular non-migraine people, insulin makes them retain a lot of energy in the form of fat, and makes them a little bit, even if they don't look overweight, internally they are, because the fat is around their organs. We have migrainists who are this thin, and they're having major insulin issues. So we are like, ET, extraterrestrials waiting from another planet. We are it, okay? So we are completely different, cannot be treated the same way as other people. In terms of what to eat when you go out to a restaurant, hey, going carnivore or zero carb is the easiest way to eat outside, because all you eat is meat or fish or seafood. The only thing that you have to be careful is how they prepare it. So I recommend that you look for things that have no sauces on them. They don't come with any kind of gravy. They're not cooked in like a stew kind of thing, because those will all have stuff in it you can't eat, like grains. So ask for a steak or a burger. Make sure that they're on the gluten-free menu, because burger sometimes has flour in it. So you got to be sure that they don't. I usually tell them that I'm a celiac, even though I'm not proven to be officially celiac, though I seem to react as though I was, because then I get a different menu. And they also prepare my meal in most restaurants, at least in California. There's a law that if you have a celiac, they can't even use the same part of the kitchen to cook, and they have to use different dishes, and they have to use different pots and pans and oils and fats. So it is a good thing to announce that you're a celiac. They're going to give you a gluten-free menu, so then you can choose the kind of foods that you want, and they will have side dishes of rice and corn or whatever, which we don't eat. Ask them to put them on a separate plate and give it to somebody in your company who may enjoy it. I find eating out in everything other than Asian restaurants. Asian restaurants are not recommended because they marinate everything. And I came down with a migraine, that was now a couple of months ago, when I went out for dinner to, I think it was a Korean place. And I ordered meat only. And some of them didn't even taste like they were marinated. And the waiter swore that they were not marinated. But I swear you they were, because I came down with a 3-day migraine after that. So there are tricks of the trade, and the waiter may or may not know what those are. So I recommend you avoid Asian restaurants. I don't know about Indian, because I don't like Indian food personally, so I don't ever go there. And any other kind of ethnic foods, I prefer not to, so I can control what I eat. If we go out, we usually pick some kind of a place where I can order a steak, burger, some fish, something simple that doesn't have anything on it. Okay, so here we come to the last question, which Lucretia asked, and I thought it was a very important one. And this is about how insulin resistance affects our sleep, the lack of sleep, how lack of sleep affects insulin resistance and diabetes, and how it contributes to it. And I think this goes back to one of the questions that I talked about earlier about their inability to sleep. So let me backtrack and let me explain a little bit what happens in the brain when you sleep. Your brain, and I was trying to find the articles, but I have like 5,000 articles on my computer, so I don't know which one it is or which ones these are. But your brain actually, a little bit, consider your brain, it's an organ within a skull that can't really move, right? We can wash our hands, we can clean our organs by adrenal gland fluids and so forth. But in the brain, it's a little bit different because the brain has to always work, and it has a hard time to disconnect and to get rid of the fragments of protein or unused glucose or broken whatever things that you have in your brain as you were working, neurotransmitters that are no longer functioning, etc. And so these things have to be cleaned out, because if they aren't, the brain is not able to repair itself, is not able to work. So what the brain does, it actually shrinks a tiny bit every single night when you're sleeping. And this one is happening during either, I forget now if it was under the deep or the REM sleep, but it's happening under one of the two. And when it is shrunken a tiny bit, you're talking about millimeters, you're not talking, not even a millimeter, a fraction. So we're talking about a tiny bit. What it allows a fluid, the cleaning fluid, which would be a spinal fluid, basically in your brain, mixed with blood, electrolytes, and everything. It sort of kind of cleans through everything in your brain. It washes out all the things that don't belong there. As that fluid passes by everything, it activates our neurons. It wouldn't activate a person who's not a migrainer. The whole point is that this is happening when you're asleep. So you're not awake by definition, and you're not stimulated. But migraineurs have such different brain structure by the multiple connections in terms of the sensory organs, that it makes it a little bit more difficult for us to sleep well, because we are more awake. We're almost like the cats that sleep with one eye open. We kind of hear noises even when we're sleeping. We can smell. When it's a fire season, I am much more alert, and I smell fire continuously all night long. So I get tired more easily and also have much more vivid dreams. But what happens is that when your brain is not able to clean properly as a result of not getting sleep, then all this gunk sort of kind of builds up in the brain. And there's also represents the amount of glucose. So glucose is assumed to sort of kind of, let's call it the base level. So everything in your body has a baseline. And the whole goal of sleeping is that most things stop a little bit. Your digestion should stop a little bit. Everything pretty much stops a little bit, reduces, your heartbeat slows down, your breathing slows down, your body temperature drops a tiny bit. So everything is at a lower tone. It doesn't stop, but it's sort of kind of at a lower tone. And so your brain also is supposed to be in a lower tone, and it's supposed to clear whatever it's in there. If it can't clear, then the next day it's not starting from this zero baseline. It's starting from a higher level. And so there have been some studies. You can find them online. I found them several times, but I just didn't think about finding them earlier, where they show that there were two groups of students, volunteers, at a university, I believe may have been UC Irvine, but it may have been somewhere else, where they called in, I think, 20 students total, and they slept within the university campus in a particular, on their 24-hour watch for 2 weeks. And in the 2 weeks, the groups were split up. So there were 10 people who were allowed to sleep as much as they wanted, and 10 who were woken up after less than 6 hours of sleep. They all ate the same thing. They all did the same thing. They were watched under 24-hour supervision. But they discovered, they kept on testing their blood to see how their blood glucose levels and how their insulin responded. And they discovered that 2 weeks of not enough sleep, of being awoken all the time earlier than what their natural sleep would have been, predisposed them to diabetes by 20%. Type 2 diabetes, not type 1. And these are students. Later research I've read suggested that as little as one missed sleep night, and I don't remember if it was a whole night was missed or just part of the night was missed, can already increase your chances of getting diabetes. So now add this to migraineurs who spent a lifetime of not getting a good night's sleep because of being continuously somehow, you're constantly paying attention. So you're not ever relaxing. Your brain is continuously on, and you're paying attention to sounds and smell and all kinds of other things, sensations. And it's in the book too. You can't sleep well if you have even a hair somewhere near your pajama or whatever. So we're just a lot more sensitive, much more easy to stimulate us. And so we therefore get less sleep. So this too is a problem in terms of insulin resistance and diabetes. And add to this the fact that we have a genetic predisposition to type 2 diabetes. And by this I mean is that all of our transporters that are associated with glucose carrying are different from what other people have. This shows up as a variant. I don't actually call this a variant. I would say that the other people are the variant, because I consider the migraine beer to be in the ancient human brain when we didn't eat glucose usually, other than whatever came with meat and insects or whatever else we ate. We didn't eat apples and cakes a million years ago. So you have to consider where we come from. So a variance basically represents an adaptation. Whether it's a good or a bad one is another question. But if it's an adaptation in the right direction, like the modern human has adapted to eating grains, for example, some of them, most of them don't, but some of them do. A lot of people adapted to drinking milk, for example. If you look at the population at large, about 80% of the people in the world are lactose intolerant. They can't have milk. Look at us, migraineurs. 80% or more of us are lactose tolerant. We're different people. So when you're looking at all this adding together, then you can see that we are very different from other people. And why are we different? Who's different? If you're looking at wild animals, or you look at your pets who are not even wild, you can see that they're continuously on alert. They're very similar to who we are. We are on alert all the time. If you pay attention to all the sensory organs at a hypersensitivity, so we pay attention to everything around us. An average person doesn't do that. They have different sensory organs. So if you have different sensory organs, you use less of a nutrient that allows the sensory organs to work and send messages within the brain between neurons, then your nutrition requirements will be different. To give you an example, a person who doesn't have migraines could sit next to me and listen to the same sound I listen to, and he or she will not hear the same thing as I do. It may be too loud for me. Maybe I will hear the foghorn go off 30 miles from me, which I often hear amazingly and nobody else does. So our sensory sensitivity is so different that the slightest variation in our electrolyte that would operate our brain to perceive these changes that we sense can be greatly affected as a result. And the slightest changes can affect, in turn, us of how we relate to the world. And so the biggest disruptive mechanism of our electrolyte is glucose. Glucose, as you all know by now, kicks sodium and water out of our electrolyte. So if you avoid eating exogenous glucose, we will not have the problems. We will not. It doesn't matter if we're or if you're genetically predisposed to diabetes, right? I mean, we're not eating glucose, so then we're not going to get diabetes. Who cares? Unfortunately, though, we live in a world where other people eat carbohydrates and eat glucose, and that means that we are unfortunately predisposing ourselves to be sick given our genetic profile. But back to the genetic profile. So I said earlier, it's a variant. It's a variant that I consider to be the original, because if I compare us to other animals that are on alert all the time, my cat doesn't eat cakes or apple. My dog shouldn't be eating cakes and apple either. Both of them are carnivores, and humans are carnivores. Actually, humans are scavengers, to be precise. Our heritage is scavenging. That is why our acid in our stomach is so strong. Our stomach acid is at the level, close to the level of vultures and hyenas. So stronger than for the lion and similar carnivores. So we have a metabolic digestion setup that is different from the modern human that is adapted to eating carbohydrates. When they eat, say my husband, when he eats he doesn't eat anymore, but when he did eat an apple, big deal, he ate an apple. When I ate an apple, I had to douse myself with salt, and even then there was no guarantee I was not going to end up with a migraine, because the apple for me completely changed my electrolyte. For him, no big deal. He just replaced it at the next meal, no big deal. So the brain works differently, and as a result of the brain working differently and requiring different amount of energy within the electrolyte. So we're talking about different mineral density in our electrolyte. We will have a lot more predisposition that we need to discourage. And that is why I'm trying to remove everybody from carbohydrates and move them over to the ketogenic diet or carnivore, because the ultimate diet for us actually is not even the ketogenic diet, because in the ketogenic diet, we still eat vegetables and some minimal fruits. But the ultimate migraine diet is really the carnivore diet, where you eat none of that. It is not easy to switch everybody over, because when you get into the carnivore or the zero carb, if you do it right, you end up in ketosis, and most migraineurs are on medications, and the ketogenic diet can interact with many of the medications, because medications are made for the carbohydrate metabolic process, and they have to go through a certain process to exit the body, half time, a certain time. And the ketogenic diet can either increase the dose of the medicine by the medicine not finding its way to leave the body, or decrease the medicine by simply killing it right off. So there's a problem with medications. And also in the diet where you end up in ketosis is a repair, it's a self-repair for the body. And so if you're on medications, say heart medication or thyroid medication or diabetes medication, these things will be removed from you really quickly in the zero carb, carnivore, or the ketogenic diet. So you have to modify what you do. But once you get into the mode of not having visible insulin resistance, so let me also explain the visible insulin resistance, because all of you come in here, all of you, nearly all of you come in without a diagnosed diabetes. And when we run the 5-hour blood glucose test, although we only measure glucose, for some of you ketones as well, glucose doesn't really tell us anything about insulin, but how your body processes the glucose can sort of hint at insulin. So when you have a reactive hypoglycemia, where your glucose just drops down below 70, that indicates that you have high insulin. And how do I know that? I know that because that means that the insulin suddenly removed a whole lot of glucose from your blood and took it to the cells. And that is why your blood, which is what we measure, ends up with lower blood glucose than it should be. There was a good explanation to this, where in the keto group, some people started using the continuous glucose monitor, which is something that they put in the arm, and it monitors the glucose in the interstitial space, which is, think of a cell, any kind of a cell, and the cell is going to be floating in its own little fluid, which has a little membrane around it. So the cell has a membrane, and then it's surrounded by a fluid, and then another cell on the outside of that, or there will be a capillary, the supply of blood. But so the interstitial space is around each cell. That is basically, think of that as the refrigerator of the cell. So it's a cell, wants something, it reach out, grab something, okay? And in terms of the blood, think of that as the store. That is not readily available. It has to come out and get to the interstitial space, and from the interstitial space, the cell can get it. Some food elements like glucose have freedom of going by diffusion. Diffusion means is that it'll flow to places where there is less of it, given the amount of fluid. So for example, if you eat an apple, just giving an example here, not that you should eat an apple, the glucose from the apple will suddenly flood your blood. So it will suddenly also get to all through your body to the interstitial space. It won't get into the cell, but it will get into the interstitial space. However, if the interstitial space already has a lot of glucose in it and is waiting to be picked up by the cell, it's not going to go to the interstitial space. It's going to stay in the blood. So many of the people who had this continuous glucose monitor and also use a prick, they found that they get different readings, because in the interstitial space, there was different amount of glucose that was ready for the cell based on what the cell needed versus what was in their fingers. So they found oftentimes that around the cell in the interstitial space was less glucose than what would be in their fingers. And that's a good sign. That means that the cell is actually taking up the glucose as it's supposed to. And from the blood, the interstitial space is going to be possible to be fed glucose as it needs to, which is a natural flow. It's just going to flow in there. However, if you have a lot of insulin in your blood, the glucose is going to stay in there longer because it has a harder time to remove the glucose from the blood. But what does your pancreas do at this time? The pancreas says, hey, I have a lot of glucose in the blood and it needs to be removed, because a lot of glucose for a long time is actually toxic to the body. This is why we have diabetics amputating their limbs and fingers and so forth. So to prevent that, the pancreas generates more and more insulin, and you have an upper limit of how much insulin your body can produce, but it's going to keep on doing, to the maximum level, as much insulin as possible, and it will reach a point when you have so much insulin that all the blood at once is going to be all the glucose at once is going to be removed from the blood and delivered to the cells, and it's going to be forced into the cells or be forced into the liver for fat storage or whatever else. And so having a reactive hypoglycemia is a sign that you have too high insulin for what you need. By contrast, those who went on the zero carb diet or the carnivore diet find that their glucose is a little bit high, like morning glucose is going to be a little bit high. And they voice concern that, hey, why is my blood glucose in the morning higher than it normally used to be on the ketogenic diet? And that's because when you're on a carnivore or zero carb diet, your insulin says, I'm not needed. I'm just going to be seeping out slowly, regularly, generally all the time as the protein synthesis is happening. I don't need to actually come out for anything else because there's no carbs, there's only fat and protein. And so a minimal amount of glucose from that. So what happens then is the insulin production is reduced. So with a reduced insulin production, then you're going to end up with a little bit more glucose in the blood. But this is all endogenous glucose, meaning it's from the body creating glucose. It wasn't an apple you ate. It was the body converted protein into glucose. And that too is a process that is a natural process with the speed of the body. So at this stage, we don't need to worry about if you have a little bit higher blood sugar than normal. If you have 140 for a long time, yeah, that's a problem. But if you're like 99, 100, for a while, and then it goes back into 92, 93, and then 100 again, that's totally fine. You're moving within a reasonable line. And in a ketogenic diet, it's reasonable to be moving in the 80s, which is where I used to be. Now I'm in the 90s also on the carnivore diet. So that is completely normal. And that just signals you're actually what would be called physiological insulin resistance. So you don't have enough insulin to handle the amount of glucose, not because you can't make it, it's because your body is not is not used to making that much. So I hope that will make sense, and we're pretty much up at the hour. So if you have any questions, we're going to keep on repeating this. Every month I try to have a webinar like this and answer some questions, and I hope everything is answered, and keep on asking your questions, all right? So have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you in the group. Have a good one. Bye.